I'm delighted to have on my programme this morning Jimmy Saunders. Jimmy, originally from Castlecomer, but from my chat with him, he has travelled to many, many parts of the world. And he's in here because he's written a fascinating book called From the Outside In. Well, it's about his family, but principally about his mother. And if ever there was a mother's boy, Jimmy Saunders is that mother's boy. Jimmy, you're very welcome.
Thank you very much, Nicky.
Tell us about growing up in Marymount in Castlecomer in number 25.
It was definitely the best years of my life. And number 25 was a very extremely magical place for family, and I'm delighted to have the memories and being able to put them down in a book in number 25.
And tell me about your family. Who was in your family at that stage?
At that particular stage, there was Thomas, Michael, Noel, my sister Jean, and my twin sister Philomena, and Martin, Tony. Tony passed away in November last year, and obviously my mum. I had never got to meet my dad because he eloped when we were born.
What did that mean to you that your dad was not around for you and the rest of your family, and indeed your mum? Because through the book, obviously, there's little talk of your father, but you did say you didn't know who he was, and you've just said that there again. What was it like growing up without a dad and so much pressure on your mum to support the family?
It was huge pressure on my mum. And for me as a child, it was a sad point as I had to go to school and people would say, what did your dad do? But the more as I grew older, Mum would just say, your dad's not around now, and we're together. We never really asked too many questions.
Where was he?
Yeah, he went to London.
And did he ever make any contact with any of you afterwards?
No. I was very sad at times because, for instance, when I was 8 years of age, going on 8, I remember coming home from school in a walkway by the church in Castlecomer, and a woman came up and said, I saw your dad in England. So that was a very hard thing for me to have to deal with. So I'd run home and say to Mum, where's Dad? And calm me down and just say, look, your dad isn't here. We're here as a family. That was quickly good enough for me to be able to survive that day.
When he walked out on you and your family and your mother in particular, he never kind of helped the family afterwards.
Never.
He never supplied money because money was scarce in the house.
Yeah. He never supported us, which was a thing that even still today, I'm a little bit angry. If any man leaves a family, you can't leave children or a woman to fend for themselves. So Mum learned very much the hard way how to bring in money by dressmaking.
And I know we'll deal with this in more detail later on. When you and your brothers went to London, did you ever encounter your father at that stage?
No.
And did you ever try to seek him out to ask him why did he do this?
No, I was getting on in life and I had a lot of dislike. Mum never once said anything bad about him, but I knew there was a lot of bad things about him. Alcohol was one of them, and I spoke to one of my brothers who said he had an encounter with him, and I felt that was good enough. I moved on. I was so happy the way Mum brought us up, so I didn't need him at any point. He died when I was actually in school. I was 15 and a half, and so he died of a heart attack, and we just moved on.
Is he buried in England?
Yes, he's buried in Birmingham.
Yeah. I thought it was a sad part of the book that because it impacted a lot of your life because your mother was very much the one parent family thereafter.
I remember, Nicky, can you believe this story, which I don't think is in the book, and she went down, before I remember, she went down to the local hall in Castlecomer, which is where they used to give maybe a pound if you're really badly stuck at that time, and she went down. She's such an honest woman today, and she's always been an honest woman, and she went down to ask, could she have £5 to be able to get the kids their dinner? And a man said there, okay, we'll do it, but you have to pay us back. And the next thing he said, when is Tommy back? And she said, I'm hoping he's going to be back in 2 days to see the kids. And the man withdrew that £5 and he said, you can forget about that. If he's coming back, he owes us money. And she had to go back up to the house with no money, no food, the kids staring out the window. And then that was the day she made up her mind that she was going to do dressmaking full time. She couldn't rely on anybody to give her anything.
But throughout the book, you say very much so that you were never hungry though in the house. I mean, your mother somehow or another managed to put a meal on the table. Yeah,
I remember we had the best dinners. We never did without any. We were never short, and she was very, very good at putting pennies aside. An example of that is money for the phone. But when I used to ask her a lot, and I'd say, Mum, how come our dinners are on a big plate and yours is on a small plate? And she said, well, I'm just making sure that you guys have enough to eat and you never complain about anything. She used to have one spud and a little bit of cabbage on her plate every day, and I never saw her eat breakfast. So she was that kind of woman that she made sure the children would never complain about food.
And as you were growing up, obviously, your appetites were growing all the time.
Oh, absolutely. And it's quite amazing. Sometimes as a child, they're not questions you ask your mother. As long as you're fed, you run out and play. But I would look at her and I saw her getting thin, and our dinners were big, so I couldn't understand why she was being a little bit thin. I was about 7 or 8 when I asked her, and I asked her at night, why don't you eat? She used to have pains in the stomach as well from not eating, to make sure the children had all the food. They were tough times.
They sure were.
Yeah.
You mentioned in the book, early part of the book, about your Uncle Jimmy, and he spent 35 years in the mines. Now, I'd be very familiar with the mines in Comer. I interviewed Seamus Walsh, who wrote the book Coal in the Blood, about the mine, so I'd know about the tough times. But that was tough because he eventually went to New York, and as you say in the book, he died of black lung. Yeah,
I'd like to say a big hello to Mary Lena, his daughter. We're very, very close, and Mary Lena, she misses him so much. Philomena, my twin sister, is out there all the time visiting Mary Lena. And Jim, when he left, we had Jim, Michael, Paddy, Grandad. And my father only lasted about 2 years in the mines because he was quite claustrophobic. But Jim went out to America. He never complained, got a job straight away, and he just went on with his life.
But it was a big decision to make, to leave Castlecomer having spent 35 years in the mines.
Absolutely, Nicky. There were very tough times when the mines closed down. You either had an emigration situation or you could hang around and wait for something to happen. But Jim knew what he wanted when the mines were closing down. He knew he had to get out.
But he also left Castlecomer, I suppose, with the impact of the coal, the dust, everything in his lungs, and he took that with him because, as Seamus Walsh so brilliantly put in his book, they spent a long time seeking compensation for the miners for what happened there.
Yeah, I don't know about, because I was away when the guys were seeking the compensation, but Jim, he just got on with it. He just went out to New York, worked, and as far as his family and our family were concerned, that he just worked until he dropped. So he didn't think about anything like that. It was just work.
Well, anybody who worked in the mine. And talking about work then, obviously, as you guys and yourself and your brothers, and you were the youngest, obviously, on the boy side, with your twin sister Philomena, you went out to work as soon as it was possible because you needed to support your mum. Talk to me about some of the things that you and your brothers got up to on the work stage locally.
Sure. Locally, I was in school. I remember, actually, I was in school and I said at 15 years of age, Mum, I want to leave school and I want to go out. And I worked for a couple of weeks selling Mater Hospital pools, and I became the big seller there. But I felt I can't be going around the street asking people for money. I've got to go back into school, finish a year or two, and then head off to Australia or London. And so what I did was I left school approaching 17, and I did an 3-year apprentice draper in Frank Wall's man shop. And my brothers were all in Australia. Like Michael and Thomas had gone to Australia, Noel was in London, and Pat was out in Ballaragget. He was working with some company there. And so as soon as I left Frank Wall's man shop, I went out to Australia, did a year, which was an absolutely amazing year because I became the youngest section manager in a company called Country Road Australia, which was based in Sydney. And then I went on to Melbourne, and I actually ended up running a shop, a market for the same company. I worked 7 days a week, and I was sending money all the time over to Mum, and very proud to say that. And then when I came back, spent a year, went into Carlow College to do an accountancy and management course, and then headed straight over to England, and I got a job in John Lewis with my brother, who later became managing director. And I decided then to roll over to Harrods, and I worked in Harrods for 4 years.
We'll come back to Harrods. We'll come back to Harrods again, sure, because that was fascinating in the book. Talk to me about heading off to school, because you went off to school obviously with your sister Philomena. You were twins. You had experiences good and bad in the education system in Comer.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, Castlecomer was a very magical place, and it'll always be the place that I love. But every time I came home from England, I'd travel out to Comer and I would speak to the guys about certain times that happened when the cane was pretty legal in the system. And everybody mentioned the one person that I mentioned in the book. You'd end up with your hands black and blue from the cane on a lot of days. And it's not something that you'd run home and for me, it wasn't something that you'd run home and tell your mum. That you would just end up with your hands scarred. And I took a lot of days off as much as I could.
Yes, I saw that. You feigned sickness on a number of occasions.
Absolutely. It was last year I was allowed to see the roll book, and I noticed on particular days that I was off sick. It was usually to recoup the hand from being black and blue.
But you had a great ally in Dr. McAneeney, God rest him.
Do you remember him, Nicky?
I know him very well.
He was an absolute legend of a doctor, and Dr. McAneeney looked me straight in the eye. He also noticed the bruises on my hand from the cane, and so he would say to my mum, he'd look at me and he'd say he needs a few more days or an extra day off, and just keep nicely tucked up in bed.
And I liked the way he suggested the bottle of Lucozade.
Oh God, it was a favourite of his. He knew I loved Lucozade. But you know the funny thing is, Nicky, it was really funny. I never put this in the book, but as I was waiting for Dr. McAneeney, I remember hearing Mrs. Robinson, the song from Paul Simon, Our Garfunkel, had just come out. And can you believe it? They put that song on while I was sitting in Dr. McAneeney's to celebrate that the end of the Vietnam War had just begun. It was 1973 and 74, and they were pulling out at 75. And so there was a lot of talks about the Vietnam War, that America were actually finally pulling out. And so that's something that will always stick in my mind.
But obviously as well, and talking about music, and we'll touch on that later on, you did say in the book that your first record that you really enjoyed or liked was Karen Carpenter's Close to You.
Do you know that Karen Carpenter played a good role in my life? When Mum used to come up and tuck me into bed, and especially being a twin, and tuck me and my sister into bed, Noel, my brother, was pretty much awake, and he'd say to Mum, look, I'm just studying, Mum, for another half hour. Noel would give me the watch, his watch in his hand, play with the watch so I wouldn't tell Mum about him studying so late. And then he'd put on a radio, and the record that first came into my head, the one that played all the time, was Karen Carpenter, Close to You. She sounded like an absolute angel, and it was my first love for music. That was my first love for music. And then as I was getting older, Mum would give me a Glenn Campbell album, and I loved Wichita Cowboy, or Wichita Linesman. Yeah.
I noticed that probably one of the most emotional things that you had at such a young age was your brother Noel immigrating to the UK. You took that very bad because you were very close to him.
Yes, still very close with Noel. Noel worked in Bullards at the time. Now, the extraordinary thing is, I think every family can be touched by a miracle, and I think we had the miracle in Noel. He worked while he was in school in the Cave Bar. That was his first job, which was cleaning out toilets or washing glasses.
Tom Downey owned it at the time.
Absolutely, he did. And then he worked for Jim Bollard. I spoke to Jim the other day, and Jim, I think, still says today that Noel was the best he ever had, and he spent until 2 a.m. trying to persuade Noel not to emigrate. When Noel made that emigration step, it was a part of my life that was again ripped off because he made the important step to emigrate.
Yeah, and of course when he went to London, himself and Thomas, they worked in the Savoy Hotel.
They worked in the Savoy.
Not any old hotel, the Savoy Hotel.
They worked in the Savoy, Nicky. They were meeting people like Shirley Temple, I think it was Charlie Chaplin a couple of times was in there, and some absolute amazing customers were in there. So we used to get feedback from them, and of course as a young boy, 8-9 years of age then, you'd be imagining how great this place must be, and your dreams and aspirations are blowing up like a balloon. And so emigration then played another side, which was hearing all the stories when they'd come back and bringing all the toys for us when they'd come back, and things were happening in their lives that couldn't happen in Comer.
I imagine that when you got the telephone, and you refer to this in the book, it completely changed your mother's life in particular, because she was now able to talk to her sons in faraway land.
Yes, Nicky. I will never forget probably the first day of that shiny black telephone.
It was a coin box, of course.
It was a coin box. It was A, to accept the call, and B, to get your refund out of it. And the beautiful shiny handle, the big handle on that phone. So we were not allowed to touch that phone for a couple of weeks, but it was the communication that Mum had with all the boys. And she'd start to get very teary-eyed at first. She was actually able to hear them, but by putting the handle back on the receiver, she ended the communication with the very young men she loved and sent out to work. And Noel made that decision by himself. And that phone played a huge role in our lives. An absolute godsend for us.
And when you went to the boys' school in Comer, I know again some of the teachers you mentioned in the book are well known to myself, Tony Patterson, John Kelly. You were obviously becoming a big lad then. You were separated from your sister a bit, so you were having to head and make something of your own life.
John Kelly was a wonderful influence to me. I'll never forget his teaching on history. And John would draw, of course, John knows very well that I was always caught at the window staring staring out and looking up at the sky to see if Noel was coming back or Michael was coming back in a plane. But John would always interest me in history, and the way he drew his history was the first time that I ever seen anything like it, that he actually really focused on a subject, and I was so interested. It was the first time in my history of schooling that I stopped looking out the window and focused on what John was doing.
I noticed that when your mother was at home, and I smiled when I read this, because we had a woman minding our children when they were young. She was just wonderful. But when she was at home, two of the things she loved was listening to Gay Byrne and listening to Harbour Hotel.
Yeah.
And your mum was exactly the same.
Do you know that's really wonderful, Nicky, because when I said to Mum I was going to write a book and I mentioned Harbour Hotel, and she nearly got a heart attack. And I remember when I used to take time off of school to recoup from my injuries, she'd be downstairs listening, and of course I'd be playing with my toys in the bed. She would know about it, and next thing I could hear Harbour Hotel, the music to it, and I could listen to the Gay Byrne show. Wonderful. This is interaction with radio straight from the bed down the stairs, and I was very, very close to listening to what she was listening to be in a way close to her, because she wouldn't let me out of bed. If I was ill, I was ill.
But I think that you had your mother wrapped around your little finger.
Oh!
You'd no doubt about it. You used to get concerned even when she was asleep in case she was not alive.
Yeah, I was so proud of her, especially during my birthdays, the preparation she put in for me and Filmina's birthday and Christmas time. And I remember watching Oliver Twist, Willy Wonka Chocolate Factory, and I would think to myself, my God, what happens if I ever lose her? What would happen? What could happen if she ever went out of my life? I'd end up like Oliver Twist. So I used to go in an awful lot of times into her bedroom and put my hand just to feel her. Was she breathing? And was she still going to be with us today and tomorrow? And that was just something, it's a bit unheard of, but it was something that I wasn't prepared for. I would never be prepared to lose her.
She was a great dressmaker.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. She did all the outfits for the fancy dress in Castlecomer, and so many people will probably remember that, because we actually won it, I think it was 4 times in a row through Mum's dressmaking, and then we won it a couple of other times. But my favourite outfit had to be the work she put in dressing a little 8-year-olds up as Princess Anne and Mark Phillips. And it was just unheard of, because the dressmaking style in Comer was either dress up as a flower maybe, or a little girl in a box. Jean was dressed up as that. But to change it into an English situation of, well, what is good today? And she was able to cop on and pick up the idea of, well, Princess Anne and Mark Phillips just got married, so let's dress. We could have been Lady Di or Prince Charles, but we ended up on that time.
You actually mentioned in the book that your mum actually wanted to be a nun.
She did.
Obviously it was and still is a devout Catholic, of
course. Nicky, you couldn't take a church away from Mum. That would be taking her arms and legs. Every single Sunday she took us to Mass, and it was a very weird experience, but a wonderful experience. She is today an absolute devoted Catholic. Every single day she's in Mass. And I said to her there a couple of weeks ago, I said, I never said it before in my life. I said, Mum, who is your favourite? I said, is it God? I said, or your children? And she said, it's a very simple answer, she said. God. And without God, I wouldn't have been able to keep you guys today.
And how did you get react to that in your own mind? Now, not so much to her, but in your own mind. Because obviously you were going to church at that stage. Then as through your own life, then maybe you weren't as religious as your mother might have liked, if I could put it that way.
Yeah. When she had told me, I said, how close were you to God? And she said, if I didn't have children, I would have been a nun. And so I said, well, that's pretty fair enough. And actually, it brought me closer to God again for the first time in 17 years. And now I am pretty close, because I'm thanking the old guy. He answered all my prayers from when I was a child.
God, you've had a few close health scares.
I did. I had prostate cancer, Nicky. My two legs were threatened to be cut off in St. Luke's. Well, to go out to Waterford and get it done. I had a blood clot 3 years ago. And then 2 years ago, I had a double bypass. So it was a 7-hour operation on the operating theatre, which was open heart surgery.
So you had a little word with the man above, I suspect, at that stage?
I think he was just reminding me who he was. That, don't forget, Jimmy, you used to pray to me. And so I did actually say a prayer to stay alive while I was going in for that operation. Now, the same day, Nicky, as I had the operation, 2 men previous to me that went in on that day died. And I was the only one left. And I'm still here.
There you go. You talk about summer being just a wonderful time, swimming in the Dynon and in the sluice rivers and going to Kilkenny and going into places we all remember of the past, Woolworths and Mulhall's Bakery. Things were getting a bit better in the house when your mum was able to do things like that.
I think it was her skill to manage. She learned from the hard way to be able to put maybe 5 pence or 15 pence a day in particular cups for certain things. And when the buggy's bus would be on strike, then she would pay a lovely gentleman called Joe Brennan to get us into Kilkenny, or Mr. Collins from Marymount would taxi us in and out again. Or if we missed the bus, she wouldn't ruin our day. She would pay for a guide to take us out to Kilkenny, spend a wonderful day in the castle, go down to Woolworths, Mulhall's Bakery. The swimming pool at John's Quay was a must for us, and a lovely time in the Castle Park. And it was they were like holidays to New York or to any place in the world, because we were with Mum and she made sure that we had everything. We walked away from Woolworths, she just said pick one toy out. And of course, I'd be there looking at 10.
Of course, like any child would be. Going to London when you went with your sister, then and your mother came over. That was the first time you were obviously in an airplane, or sorry, you went by boat. Of course, you came back by airplane, all right.
Yeah.
But you went to London and your mum came over as well. Mm-hmm. That was a great experience, because that was the first seeing your brothers in the big city that was London. Must have been a huge experience.
It was again another best time of my life.
Did that help you make your mind up to go to London yourself eventually? Was that part of it?
I don't think so. I actually don't think so. I knew when I came back, going to London was the best experience I ever had. But I had then, it actually grew my mind to think, my God, what's Australia like and other places like? As a child, I was about 9 years of age. But London surely was the most amazing place I'd ever been. I loved it. I loved travelling with Thomas. It was Thomas that wanted us over there, because he was due to go to Australia in a couple of weeks after that. So it was just absolutely amazing. And then to have Mum a week later, we didn't care how she was fixed for money, as long as she was with us and enjoying that experience. Being in Leicester Square with Noel, going to the cinema to see The Empire Strikes Back. I'm going to put up on my website, Nicky, all these little memorabilias. It was only 3 or 4 weeks ago we found our t-shirts from when we were 9, where I have R2D2 Jimmy on the way into the cinema. I had that done when I was 9 years of age. So on the website, if you don't mind me giving it a plug, which is james-saunders-fromtheoutsidein.eu, and there's going to be a little photograph place there with all the wonderful pictures. They're going up next week.
In 1980 you moved to Kilkenny. What brought that about?
Mum wanted us to have the experience of going into a bigger place. She wanted a new environment for us to actually do. So I think she felt the high school part now was going to be one of the most important parts, because it was when we left high school we had to make a decision where we were going to go. We had that opportunity that the other kids in our family didn't have. We were lucky enough to have that, and she was going to make it great for us. We went into the Kilkenny City Vocational School, and it was a new experience, Kilkenny. And it was just like London.
Did you miss Comer?
Not at that time. To be honest with you, the day I left, I said goodbye to my friends. Like Barry Byrne was a very close friend of mine, and I went knocking at the doors. We were told to go knocking at the doors to say goodbye. I'd like to say a big plug out to Rachel Byrne as well, and Eileen Byrne, and Jimmy Byrne, who taught me the guitar on Comer.
And Jimmy Byrne knew how to strum a guitar.
Oh, he's number one. They're still my number one people today. But the transition of going out to Castlecomer, the adventure of leaving Comer into Kilkenny, and I remember confirmation, so we had to go back out to Comer because Eileen was one of our best friends, and we had a wonderful day. But once I went back to Kilkenny, I had new friends, a new adventure, and it was a new beginning.
I came across something in the book, and I didn't spend enough time maybe reading it to understand it, about the Indian man wanting to buy Philomena and yourself. Mm-hmm. Explain that to our listeners.
Yes, well, we were out in Comer. I think we were about 4 years of age, and a tallyman is what they used to be called at that point, with a turban on his head, and he had a big huge suitcase. So he tried to sell as much as he could to Mum, but Mum couldn't afford anything. And kind of a clever man, because he recognised that she couldn't afford any of the items in the bag. So a week later he came back and he offered her 10,000. It was about 10,000 punts at the time for me and my sister. And of course she threw him out. He was gone. And I remember asking her about 2 or 3 years later about that man, because it never left my mind. And she told us that he was very clever. He saw that we couldn't afford anything. She couldn't afford anything, but she could have a better life if she wanted to, if she sold her children.
We'll come back to your mum now before we finish the interview, but I want to just quickly go through your own life. You left Ireland and you're mentioning countries to me here for sport before we started this interview. Give me a bit of a resume through your own life once you left Ireland.
When it was 1989, 1990, I was in the Kilkenny City Harriers, and I'd been with the Harriers for a couple of years, and I had done extremely well on the relay, the 100, 200, and I was training for the Seoul Olympics. And during the Leinster Championships and the run-up to the Olympics, I had missed a time for the 200 relay to qualify into the Seoul Olympics, and I missed it by a quarter of a second. And so I made up my mind, right, that's it, I'm giving up running, I'm going over to England, I'm going to start working, and I'm going to start getting involved in music. So I joined the band over there, and quickly enough I got involved in, after I'd come back from Australia, I was well aware of electric music, dance music, and so I became a DJ while I was working. I never stopped working in England, worked all my life there, but learned how to master the skills of mixing and DJing in clubs, and I ended up DJing in some of the most famous clubs around the world from London while I was based in London. And so as times grew, my reputation grew as a DJ. Then I started producing music. I produced 6 albums and made about 11 singles, records. All my stuff was on vinyl.
Talk to me about some of the artists you would have encountered.
Wow. The ones that I encountered, like George Michael, lived pretty much near me, and I met George Michael. I was very good friends with Lee John from Imagination, and I was very close on the second encounter with George Dowd, whose family are from Tipperary. That's by George, and he was DJing with me in Ministry of Sound, and I was on tour with Technotronic, so Technotronic offered me from one club to go on tour in Germany with him, which I did. So I was the DJ, and then they'd come on live on stage. One of their tracks is called This Beat is Technotronic, so I was very aware of them, but being in the circle of the music industry and the DJ world, I started to meet some of the best in the business who actually pushed me in. There's so many of them.
You actually indicated to me, and I wasn't aware of this, that you actually spent time in the old KCR studios out in Ballycallan, the forerunner of this station. That was something I didn't know. Now, that's not in the book, of course, but you did mention to me. You have good memories of that as well.
Yes, absolutely, Nicky. I spent 2 years of my teenage life, my late teens, before I emigrated. I took over from Frank Kine. Frank asked Paul Dwyer to ask...
Both now sadly gone.
Absolutely. And Paul said, Jimmy, come on, you got to do this, try it. And Paul influenced me to go out to KCR, and I ended up with Nick Minogue saying to me, how would you like to take over Thursday night, Saturday night and Sunday? And I did, and I became twice, I think it was in a row, the favourite of the listeners. And so the favourites that were picked out, there was myself and Ray Barofi, and good old Ray was fantastic to work with. I didn't see a lot of him, but he was brilliant.
Still going strong.
You got our friend next door there.
Yeah, Don Devlin is strumming away as we're speaking.
Legendary Don. I used to listen to Don before I ended up being on the radio. Tom Dowling and all those guys. And so I was there, I think it was about 2.5 years, and I had a wonderful time there, and then I left because I made the decision to emigrate. And
of course. Yeah. Let's get back to your mum before we finish, because it's a remarkable story. But your mum is hale and hearty. She's out swimming, and she had a mishap there one time but recovered from it. She's out swimming. Where does she get the energy from? And maybe I should realise that, because when I read the book, I'm seeing her energy just oozing out of the book.
We've always, every one of us in the family, and we are a pretty big family as regards as relations and everybody goes. And Mum, forgive me for actually mentioning this, but when I went to buy a boxer dog one day, many years ago, I bought a dog and I read a book, and the doctor's the boxer's life mentioned the last couple of years has to be the best for an animal. And of course we all love her mum 1000%, but I decided to come back home, and Noel decided to come back home, because why not a human being, especially the member of her family, the most loved member of her family? Let's make her last couple of years the best years, and we'll bring pure quality into her life. So we decided to get her membership of the gym up in Lochboy, and she has wonderful days. She's up there now swimming. This morning she was up there swimming for an hour. She's 91, going on 92, and I think everybody, every human being deserves a quality. And if you're able to give quality and attention and wonderful time space with the person that actually did so much, we can never repay her for what she had done for us and how she prepared us for life.
What did she say when you told her you were writing a book, or has she read the book?
And she has.
What's her reaction been?
She said, "Don't write about me in it." And,
well, she's the star of the show.
She is, and my sister.
And that's what you wanted it to be.
Absolutely. And my wonderful twin sister decided to give up her teaching job in New York for 20 years to come back and look after her. So we'd be number one looking after her. And my sister read it because Mum has lost a bit of hearing in her ear and a little bit of sight in her eye. And so she asked Philomena to read it twice. And every time I went up, she said she just put her arms around me. She's so little, so I'd have to bend down and she'd say thank you and thank you and thank you. And I said to her that after I was reading Laura Ingalls Wilder, how she bought her book together, I said, Mum reminded me of Laura Ingalls Wilder. She was a lady that was never able to tell her story, nor did she even feel up to it, or did she care about that. But I feel her story was an amazing story, and as short as the book may be, the words in there for her that represent her are a lifetime's worth.
It's an amazing story. From the Outside In is written by James Gerrard Saunders. Jimmy Saunders in front of me here today. I really enjoyed our chat. That book is available in all good bookshops. It's worth reading because it shows a wonderful woman who reared a family in difficult times but has lived to see her sons and her daughters grow up to be very successful, and I'm sure she's very proud of you all now, Jimmy.
Thank you very much, Nicky. Absolutely. I believe she will be very proud. Till then.